What does the future hold? A brighter dawn or the end of the line? Join us today, and together we'll peer into the unknown. One of the most common end-of-the-year things to do is make predictions about the future. Of course, that's basically what we do on this show every episode. That's why it's called Science and Futurism. So it's been my custom to shake things up a bit with end-of-the-year predictions, including episodes on why trying to predict the future is nigh impossible. So we will have some predictions, even some fairly specific and short-term ones, but we are as much going to be talking about prediction and how to usefully do it, and where it can be deceptive or counterproductive, even when based on solid reasoning. In this way, you should finish this episode not just with my predictions, but with the ability to assess those of others more critically and make your own predictions more reliable. And of course, this being SFIA and it being the darkest time of the year, we'll try to make the case for why a bright future is possible, likely, and probably within your personal grasp. We'll be doing that with logic and data, not platitudes, and that's going to take a little bit of time. So grab yourself a drink and a snack, and let's begin. Now, some things are reasonably predictable. We know this intuitively, and it's how we can do weather forecasts or make decent guesses about who will succeed at something. But there is a sequence of cause and effect events where something major is driving the results. We know with high accuracy the sun will rise tomorrow because we know why it does rise and how overwhelming the inertia for it to do that is. Though indeed, while the statement was true when I wrote this, right after the autumn equinox, when this episode comes out just after the winter solstice, large parts of the northern hemisphere had no sunrise, nor will they tomorrow. And if we wait long enough, the astronomical variables involved will shift. Earth's day will grow longer. The sun will go red giant, then white dwarf. If Earth remains after that, it will eventually settle into a decaying orbit around a cooling husk of a dead star that would briefly flare back into existence when Earth fell into it roughly a quintillion years from now, when all the universe is basically dead. That's a pretty long-range forecast, yet we could make it reliably, assuming humanity or some other intelligent agency didn't intervene. And we have whole episodes on how and why they might. Some things we can predict with very accurate timelines, like planets or eclipses. The physical inertia for them is simply immense, and there seems no motive or means at hand to prevent them. You can have social inertia too. For instance, 2026 will be the United States of America's 250th birthday. And I've been surprised how little this has been brought up in 2024, but I'd imagine by sometime in 2025 it will be a regular conversation and news item to mention it. And by July 2026, an omnipresent feature on social media and news, with the associated educational historical videos here on YouTube and associated merchandising too. The exact form of that is harder to predict, but here the timeline is very easy to predict. Some things we can't predict timeline on, but we can say the form they will take and say they seem almost inevitable, like more robot helpers around the house. Because we know tech will allow this and we know people would like this. Elon Musk's new humanoid robot helpers, announced as hitting the market in 2026, might be the real tipping point for that, but we already have robot vacuum cleaners and lots of automated appliances. That timeline might be surprising, and the shape too. I was honestly expecting us to avoid human-form robots or androids inside the home. But in retrospect, the advantage of having it ape your actions to learn a task makes sense. You tell it to watch you while you do something, a normal human learning approach, so one easy for us to use too, and it can then repeat that action. Previously, the rationale for a human robot, for non-companion purposes, was that it was cheaper to build a robot who could operate hundreds of tools built for humans rather than computerize each of those tools. That was Isaac Asimov's reasoning anyway. But computers got way smaller and cheaper, so that it made more sense to automate your vacuum and other appliances and your car than have a robot who could only operate one or the other at a time. Retrospect often makes future predictions seem silly. Hindsight is 2020 after all. Which is another interesting aspect of prediction. While it's often much easier to see the events of the next few days compared to the coming years, it's often easier to know with certainty how the end will come. As they say, the only two certainties in life are death and taxes, and the apparent fate of the universe via heat death leaves us a shrinking number of possibilities as that end comes, rather than an expanding number as diverging future events usually do have. Most ultimate eventualities for life in this universe could be thought of as an old man with a slowly failing mind living in a mansion full of recordings of past events. For a long time he can repair the place and keep those books in good shape, copying those that fade, but over time he runs out of stockpiled resources and there's none to scavenge except from his house, so he slowly burns less important books to keep the house warm, while collapsing now empty rooms and bookshelves to repair the remaining house. Eventually he even has to throw his own autobiography on there and the manuals that explain how to repair and operate the home and its few remaining pieces of equipment. That's the default fate of any intelligent creature living after the post-stellar era of the universe, around a quadrillion years from now, and around 100,000 times further ahead in the future than the universe is old. So it's a long time, and as we discussed in our Civilizations at the End of Time series, and you can stretch those resources out a very long time compared to a quadrillion or even a quintillion years. But the end does come. It might come sooner from accident or injury, though in a very high-tech future, that injury in that case would probably be someone who wanted to raid your resources to add to their own stockpile, or wanted to settle a grudge they've been nursing for a few trillion years and thought they could get away with it now as everything turns dark. Now I say trillions of years in the future, or quadrillions or quintillions, but this might be your own fate, and indeed even folks born in the next century or two might be lasting that long, maybe even you or I. If your technology for life extension gets good enough to extend our lives a bit, then those slow improvements might outpace that slowly extending lifetime to keep you from dying or encourage you to try an option like freezing yourself for later restoration. Such being the case, those born earliest to quasi-immortality will hold a huge edge on stockpiling knowledge and resources, as well as influence and power. And indeed there may be no new stars or people born after a few million years in our future, simply from everything being divided up already and stockpiled for slow use. Now if you should be one of those people, which would be very likely if you're still around in 2125 to listen to this, don't feel too grim about becoming that old man in the Grand Mansion Library burning his past to stay alive one more day, because he and all the other near-identical amnesiacs near the end of time did live quadrillions of years of life, probably incredibly fascinating and enjoyable life. The only downside is that it will have been on a budget, just like our lives now. Predictions of a post-scarcity future are common, but wrong in a finite universe, and that's why when we discuss post-scarcity civilizations on this show, we don't define it as a non-scarcity of material resources, but a scarcity of anxiety in an informed and sane individual about the meeting of their needs, from basics like food and water to more complex and existential needs. There's a finite amount of water in the seas, and one day it will be gone. We slowly leak atmosphere too. But an informed and sane person is not suffering anxiety about the oceans drying up and the atmosphere boiling away, or dying in a quintillion years. You may avoid the old man's fate by being killed or by suicide when you got bored, or by finding how to tap into something infinite, though this ultimately means your own fate shifts instead to a mansion that sprawls ever bigger and bigger, full of more and more books, your journals of events, your memories on hard drives, until you start finding that some volumes are near identical, and eventually even completely identical. You and everyone else just merges into the same person or personality, because on infinite timelines, or just approaching them even, you all have the same experiences. That probably includes growing very wise, and also erasing your memories to a blank template sometimes. Infinity is not kind to the mortal mind. But maybe there's workarounds we can't see. Certainly, if they exist, you have got plenty of time to find them. Nonetheless, science seems to support the old adage about how not much really matters, and in the really long term, nothing does. At least if you're measuring value in how long and accurately you can record things. Legacy building in a finite cosmos with eternity in mind probably is not a good strategy. Nonetheless, I predict our society will grow increasingly interested in long-term projects and life extension, because most of us find life interesting and would like to extend it for as long as that can be the case, and we are already aware that we are going to die, and usually expect it a lot sooner than 1 trillion years from now. We tend to accuse our society of being short-sighted, and it's not a hard accusation to make stick, but while our ancestors could be very long-sighted at times, as some of their megalith, pyramid, and cathedral building projects seem to indicate, we definitely plan things out a lot more in depth and long-range than they. We simply have more data and computational capacity to do so, and the science to see how a lot of things function so as to be predictable. We can look at road use and weathering and estimate how often we need to replace one, or when it would be economical to. All of which seems to imply we are going to become an ever more data-driven civilization, which might depress some folks, but in a period of specialization and AI, this isn't likely to feel any more that way than all the stuff we already do that is data-driven. You don't think of yourself as being data-driven when you follow the cooking instructions on a recipe or look at your gas tank level, access your long-term memory of when and where you should buy fuel, and pull over to a pump or charge up. If, as opposed to 25 years ago in 1999, you find that fuel station by asking your phone to plot you a course to the best gas station, and it quietly compares your route, how much time and fuel you must spend to get to each station, the cost at the station, reviews of that station, and maybe if you like the coffee they are better, or the food from whichever diner or franchise is nearby. None of that is mystical or magical. We generally were doing that before smartphones too, just with less precision and mostly subconsciously. A good AI is going to adjust the weighting on decisions to your known preferences too, so you don't get a society where everyone makes the same decisions or is ultra predictable. Data-driven behavior, especially if the core number crunching is being done by other folks or AI, is really no different than experience-driven behavior or advice-driven behavior, which are the two main alternatives to either trial by error or spontaneous, uninformed decision-making. And if you like those two options, it's worth noting you can make a lot more errors or bad uninformed decisions without dying or great hardship if you've been letting data, personal experience, or good advice handle most of your decisions, as you're more likely to have a big reserve for when you mess up. Since a lot of times those more spontaneous or whim-based decisions tend to make us feel more like we are in control of our life, we don't really aim to remove them, just to try to set ourselves up for resisting the desire for major or reckless decisions, or to be able to mitigate the bad results. As I like to say, the point of technology is to open new doors to more options for people in general, and then individual persons decide which doors they wish to pass through. Keep unpredictable decision in mind though, because when folks start talking about predicting the future, they tend to assume advanced computers will know what you are doing, or even if not what you will do, what society in general will do, as a statistical average. As we see with psychohistory, the future prediction method from my namesake Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. And that is a neat idea, and you can indeed make decent forecasts on a lot of large group behavior, but there's no magic to it, and we need to understand it can never work well with people because those people are self-aware and do not want to be predictable automatons, like the robots Asimov was also famous for writing about, and which may be coming to a home near you fairly soon. It is not simply that small actions can change big ones, the beating of a butterfly's wings affecting a distant hurricane's course. It's that any thinking creature has two strong motivations to take unpredictable actions even when they might think them less likely to be beneficial than something more predictable. The first is that desire to show or remind yourself that you are not a predictable puppet controlled by fate or destiny. Individually, most of us hold contradictory views on fate and destiny. We casually believe in it while also casually believing we can buck it. There's probably some core psychology going on there that's critical to how humanity operates, maybe even something that might be a Fermi paradox filter. But it is how we operate, and we all hate making decisions too, but also hate the idea of someone else telling us what to do or making our decisions for us. I suspect this would be true of any sophisticated AI or AGI too, both that we would not want one of them deciding for us, and that they would share our distaste for being a predictable automaton. Regardless, that's our first point of unpredictability. People resent feeling predictable and will seek to act accordingly, and assuming our knowledge of quantum is more or less accurate, then you can generate random numbers through quantum that are truly unpredictable. There is frequently a lot of uncertainty and margins of error on data and decision paths, so if we imagine a person decided to use a quantum random number generator to pick a path every time they had a decision that was roughly coin flip odds, and had a modest uncertainty or margin of error, that person rapidly becomes unpredictable in future actions, and everyone interacting with them does too. As time passes since that event, more knock-on effects will push out from it, hitting people and events that they never came near, or even that someone they knew came near, even assuming it isn't built into our brains as Orc-OR suggests. Simply because some years back we picked our lunch menu on the show of a quantum generator, and it came out as a cheeseburger. And the quantum cheeseburger has been a show joke ever since then, and does make the geekier meme rounds, unlike the quantum chimichanga or quantum salad, which presumably do in other multiverse variants than our own. And I tend to use random numbers for decisions fairly often anyway, including channel ones, as the closer a decision is, the harder and more draining deciding on it is, and the less likely you are to be making a usefully distinct choice. There usually is a real right and wrong decision, in a case that seems to be lining up to about 50-50, but if you've laid out all the bits and pieces to it, consulted for advice, and it's still stubbornly sitting there at about 50-50, you are unlikely to find it by further pondering and might as well flip a proverbial coin or use a random generator. Additional pondering, research, and decision-making on that point is only increasing opportunity cost while adding to your stress with very little gain. So flip a coin, or roll a dice. Which has the secondary benefit of foiling anyone relying on your predictability, like some AI or foundation running predictive human models to control civilization. And that's our second reason for occasional random action. It foils anyone whose strategies rely on ultra-good prediction of events. This, of course, isn't done by actual real strategists who know how unpredictable things get, but is popular in science fiction, where the chessmaster bad guy can say, "Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen it," where in that particular case, Emperor Palpatine can actually see the future. The reason you can plan many moves ahead in chess is because the game is very simple and limited in options, and almost all the moves available at any given time are clearly bad choices, and even if someone does pick them, you can alter your plan to take advantage of their mistake for a better outcome than you would have gotten otherwise. The game goes awry if you put your opponent in check, smugly say, "Your move," and they reach out, pick up a piece, and punch you in the face with it. Anyway, that's my next piece of life advice for the end of the year episode. Coin flips are a very wise way to make decisions when they are strongly contested. For whatever reason, people tend to respect the outcome, so it's good for settling disputes among loved ones, though only if you're really at an impasse or it is really trivial, like picking between hamburgers or pizza for dinner. Small caveat: while you're obviously obliged to stick to a decision on a coin flip if you made an agreement with another person to do so, at least if you plan to work with them in the future or care about honor or reputation, using it for personal decision-making is different. For my part, if I find myself having problems making a decision and flip a coin or roll a dice, if I get an outcome and sigh in relief, I keep it. But if I find myself unhappy with the result, I go the other way, because now I know I had a hidden preference that I wasn't letting myself see, and that may have been aiding or sabotaging my efforts, or do so down the road, while picking the path I truly was more enthusiastic about may be more beneficial now that I have admitted to the enthusiasm and it will fuel my future efforts. Life advice number 2, you will do better at a task you are enthusiastic about, so wherever possible and reasonably practical, pick those paths over the ones that might seem a bit better but you dislike. Remember that for setting your goals or New Year's resolutions. If those include things you dislike, try to find something that might achieve the same end, even if not as well, that you do like. I suspect civilizations will often do this too, over picking paths based on pure efficiency. You can use a quantum number generator if you want, doubtless there's a market to be tapped for apps doing that on a phone, but in all honesty, a coin is fine. Even a super-intelligent AI is not going to be able to predict the outcome of a coin flip, totally Newtonian though it is, that will be taking place next week at a rough location. There's just too many wide-changing and chaotic variables for that. It's instead going to try to force inertia into the system so it doesn't matter. You flip a coin about what food to eat out of two preferred options. You don't flip it against a random recipe book whose ingredients aren't even in your house, let alone on whether or not to eat. Some things are again highly predictable, but it's because they are mechanistic. When you are trying to drive events through rocky and uncertain future terrain, you make sure you do your driving not with a broken down car with the wheels about to fall off, but instead with a mainline battle tank. But people like to talk about historical inertia and cycles, like history was a wheel. But the wheel of a car does not turn endlessly. It turns while the driver tells it to and with an actual purpose, getting from point A to point B, then stops. It is a purpose-driven device created to do a specific job, and that job is best done by repeating the same action over and over, so a sturdy wheel on a smooth axle helps. Not only does that wheel lack any brain or motivation of its own, it has no way to protect itself from failure, some big pothole or bearing breaking or someone shoving a rod through the spokes of the wheel, thus not really a good analogy for human events. Where we are predictable, it is in specific ways and not surprising ones. I predict more people will use AI next year than did this year. That's an easy one, so obviously no one is gasping in awe. And of course they should not be. AI is currently seen as very useful and still basically safe. We know people can do damaging things with it, like other tools, but like those other tools, we tend to logically assume this is why we should get one and learn how to use it, to benefit or protect ourselves. We all know that AI might turn into the hammer that decides to whack us on the head, but at the moment at least, we all correctly assume it has no motives of its own and is unlikely to get unchained in 2025. I can't predict if World War III will start next year. I think it less likely than not, though simultaneously worry it's more likely than any time in my adult life. Nonetheless, I can comfortably predict that if one does break out, it will be human on human still, not us for Skynet. Even if it will use a lot of drones and AI on both sides. Obviously, if a global war breaks out, that will impact the economy a lot, though that can be unpredictable too. And even a company that makes weapons might do badly in such times, since not only is it a target for attack and sabotage, but the inventiveness of people during conflicts tends to result in new weapon designs which can cause companies to go out of business who were making the old ones. Thus we have the wisdom of the Ferengi from Star Trek and their rules of acquisition, a list of axioms that if followed guide that person to great wealth. Ferengi Rule of Acquisition number 35 speaks to us the wisdom that peace is good for business. This does sometimes get confused with Rule of Acquisition number 34, that war is good for business, and both can be quite true, but come around to the notion that chaos tends to make for opportunities, albeit stability makes it a lot easier to grow things once they've been planted. But this means that there's always folks who benefit from shaking things up even when things are going quite well overall, because in a highly stable system, it is hard to move up or down the social hierarchy. If you are playing a game with fixed rules and are already many rounds in, players doing better than average have little motivation to change those rules. Those who are doing much worse have lots of motivation too. They were often losing for a reason, so a rule change may leave them in the same spot, but a chance to do better in a new game is better than slim to no odds of improving in the current one. Everybody not on top, and sometimes even everyone not at number 1, even out of billions of players, has a motivation to shake things up. This is likely to be a pretty big factor in future humanity, especially if we get longer lifetimes. One of the weirder things about that is that those first folks to achieve radical life extension also become those best positioned to basically acquire huge resources and influence. And we'll talk about that more in a moment, but that same advantage means those folks might be those most likely to outlive even the stars themselves. And this month's Nebula exclusive will examine civilizations existing in that post-stellar era. That's out now on Nebula, the largest creator-owned streaming service, which has tons of extra content from myself and many other creators, including a new full-length episode of SFIA like Post-Stellar Civilizations that we release on the first day of every month. And every episode of this show also airs on Nebula a few days early and ad-free. No random commercials or built-in ads like this one. Using my code, IsaacArthur, you can get 40% off and join for about $3 a month, about the price of the drink or snack you've been enjoying during the episode. We also now have lifetime memberships, gift memberships, and gift cards available to let you share Nebula with friends and family. When you sign up on my link, go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur and use my code, IsaacArthur, you not only get access to all the great stuff Nebula offers, like Post-Stellar Civilizations, you'll also be directly supporting this show. And now, back to that show. I want you to imagine for the moment that in the year 2050, we finally crack the technology to end aging, and in the meantime, make enough improvements that very few people are dying, and by century's end, we have managed to reverse aging so people are looking and feeling like they're in their 20s or 30s in body and in vigor of mind, but get to keep all that experience. And I take this almost for granted as being true. I'm just in doubt about the date, maybe 2150 instead of 2050, or if something else like murderous AI or some civilization-wrecking late filter will get us first. Indeed, eternal lifespans might be a Fermi paradox filter itself. So there's a good chance you and I will still be alive and quite ourselves, or even better in mind and body than now, and we've been gaining experience, social contacts, general knowledge, and overall assets that whole time. Right now, basically every bit of land on Earth is owned, some in trust for future usage, like federal lands that aren't parks, but by and large it's owned by someone. Now the population is rising. It has done so every single year of the 20th and 21st century, and while there may be some net negative years and times when censuses were uncommon, and certainly not global, the last time we can confidently say the population went down was 1347 to 1351, when the Black Death decimated the Eastern Hemisphere. Needless to say, that wasn't a terribly predictable event where folks could have made informed investing choices about specific companies in 1346 and expected those guesses to have been right in 1352. But population is generally thought to be declining in growth rate, and many feel it may stop or even decline by century's end. I doubt that a lot personally, but my reasoning is that expected lifetimes keep going up and that medical options for having healthy kids later in life will also improve. Though stacked against that, quality and availability of birth control options will also likely improve. Obviously, if people start living longer, you get more people around, but I should note that people suddenly not dying anymore does not result in instant problems. We already, in our declining birth rate era, have about 18 to 20 people being born every year for every 1,000 alive. That's over this last decade. But alternatively, we only have 7 or 9 people dying for every 1,000 people alive each year. We don't have a slight imbalance in more people being born than dying. It's literally 2 to 1 or higher, and that's with low global birth rates. A decade before that, the birth rate was more like 20 to 22 per 1,000 people, not the current 18 to 20 range, but the death rate was 8 to 9 rather than the current 7 to 9. Another non-shocking prediction, expect to live longer than previous generations. The life expectancy in the US actually declined a little bit in the early 2020s, but that did not happen by magic. We didn't lose medical technology, we had a measurable uptick in COVID-related deaths, along with overdoses, homicide, suicide, motor vehicle crashes, heart disease, and diabetes. We presumably will get better at handling disease and mental health challenges with further research. Social science has been improving too, not just mechanical, electronic, or physiological technologies. We also have some amazing new treatments for diabetes and obesity, and as an example, I think the 2030s will see a tremendous dip in motor vehicle crashes too. Figure by then the comfort level most car buyers and voters will feel with computer co-pilots in vehicles will exceed their comfort zone with the driving skills of other drivers, particularly high-risk groups of drivers. As such, I really would not be surprised if states started requiring drivers under a certain age, say 26 when your brain finishes growing, to always have their vehicle safety features turned on. Or, just as effectively, insurance companies refuse to insure any driver of that age who didn't have those features on their vehicle. Same thing, expect a lot more automated delivery and cab services and minor phone features like a biometric reader that could warn you that you were tired or drunk, even if all it did was warn you, not have the ability to stop you. That would lower death rates a lot. We talked about a lot of game-changing technologies in our recent episode, The Next Technological Revolution. As we noted there, virtually all of those were either technologies right on the horizon or even prototyped and on the market. And if even half of them work even half as well as expected, it tends to imply a lot of increased safety and prosperity. Early in 2025, we'll be taking a deep dive of Methuselah civilizations, ones where most people live a very long time and where the civilization itself is also very old. But this is our biggest takeaway for the future. I'm a techno-optimist, and I think we will generally see civilization move to one in which starvation and oppression grow increasingly uncommon, as it's been doing for the last century, by and large. That said, that optimism does not mean I think everything will be perfect, and a few minutes ago I asked you to consider the possibility that you and I will still be around in centuries to come, and that most people alive now still are too. Again, I doubt the latter. I would guess most people currently alive will die, and probably short of 100, but I think lots of people alive now will last a lot longer, and that most people being born now, even in fairly undeveloped nations, will make it into an era where life extension permits arbitrarily long lifespans. If you are watching this, odds are good you both are in a developed country and are generally more receptive to using technological pathways of life extension than most folks, so we may be the odd ducks as current humanity goes. What life strategy should be pursued if a long-lived and techno-optimistic future is in store? Well, accumulation is very wise. Be spending less than you take in, or be spending that in an investment method, like getting your education, career, or business started. That's generally good life advice anytime outside of periods of massive unrest and chaos, the busy and diligent ant compared to the carefree grasshopper of the classic Aesop fable, ignoring the inaccurate biology there. Being a worker bee or ant sucks. And life kinda sucks a bit in a civilization where you're 20 and everybody already owns everything, and they are at their vigorous prime and staying that way. Indeed, even these days we tend to see folks succeeding in those age ranges mostly because they devote virtually all of their time to work, or are a fresh slate for some new technology or technique, or can pursue riskier strategies from having little to actually lose. That will still apply in the future, so there is a pathway for social mobility even in immortal civilizations, but there are no folks slowly retiring, or if they do, it's to live off the interest of their accumulated wealth, not slowly spending it down on the assumption of a finite retired lifetime. Or so it would seem. We'll show some good counter-indicators to this in that aforementioned Methuselah Civilizations episode. But short form, if you have a lot of assets, as everyone can in a prosperous technological society, and you are old, healthy, and confident, leaving your career or business for a totally new life isn't risky. Personalizing this, you are you, but enjoying the peak health of someone who hits the gym every day and is 30. You've got the modern equivalent of a few $1,000,000 in various savings or reasonably liquid investments. That's not terribly impressive because automation makes your society 10 times more productive than now, so even ignoring inflation, you're better off than 99% of people currently alive in 2025. And that society doesn't really need a very long or hard labor week, but it wouldn't matter if we still did 40 hours, because you don't get worn down mentally or physically as easily. You're sitting on a PhD or two worth of academic knowledge and practical skills that would impress the modern handyman, plus access to far better tools and instructive libraries. You probably have friends and family you've stayed in regular contact with for decades, but still like to try new groups and visit places. You might want to keep the same business or career, but the reality is that if your boss walked in and said, "You're fired," you wouldn't be even a little bit worried about your ability to remain comfortable financially and walk around with your shoulders held up high. Indeed, you'd probably be worried about your boss's mental health. wondering what drove him to walk in and do that. Your boss is a friend after all, you wouldn't have worked there for decades if it was unpleasant, because your society gives you the leeway to only work jobs you find pleasant or at least reasonably comfortable. This is the same scenario we discussed with transhuman and posthuman scenarios. You just have so much justified confidence in your survival ability and such a low threshold for basic survival needs because of all of your skills or health or augmentation that you may not feel much need to worry about your place on the local social hierarchy. For that reason, younger folks looking to ascend still have motivations to do so, and generally speaking, so long as your society still allows reasonable pathways forward for that, most will be willing to play. We'll skip on more dystopian scenarios, like us just enslaving or brainwashing younger generations to be our worker bees while we, or an even smaller select group of technocrats or plutocrats, just grow the pie ever bigger but cut the shares for others ever smaller. I tend to think more prosperous societies are more generous ones, and that mentoring folks or having kids or exploring new life paths will be seen as more interesting challenges to long-lived healthy people with justified confidence. I might be totally wrong about that. That said, one of the reasons I'm so pro-space development is because it is one way you can make sure there's lots of new opportunities for new folks to fill, or for older folks to move on to leave some vacancies. The solar system is beyond huge, and yet is but a speck next to our galaxy, let alone the wider cosmos. There's plenty of room for new people and new lands and new empires out among the stars. But my big prediction to wrap up the year would be that when we embrace that final frontier, we will see a lot more general prosperity and stability in society for everyone. But that's it for my predictions for the year. Obviously not a lot of actionable items for the individual in the short term. I don't do magic crystal balls or investment advice, just common sense stuff like start investing in a diverse and informed way, and invest in yourself because you're the best tool you've got. I would suggest that when you're doing your New Year's resolutions and goals, you try to break them up into manageable daily, weekly, and monthly chunks, and that you write them down and mark off your progress. Don't just do nebulous goals or set unsustainable paces. That really does help. Indeed, science says so. And don't ever let anyone, including yourself, convince you that reaching for the sky is bad. Because the sky is not unreachable, and even the sky is not the limit. Ad Astra, and we'll see you in 2025.